Welcome to the Derek Loudermilk Show. This is episode 367 with Melissa Monte. Melissa Monte is our guest today, and she's been here before, and she's the host of the Mind Love podcast about self-love. And she was just awarded the 2022 Podcast of the Year. Congratulations. That was in the Quill Podcast Awards. And today, Melissa and I have a wide-ranging conversation, including a lot of different ways that we manage our mind and our judgments and our view of the world and how we pick and choose the most beneficial way of being and looking at the world that's going to fit us. So I think I'll let you just get right into joining us on this conversation. So here is Melissa Monte. Okay, let me just ask you, like, what else has been on your mind recently in the last few weeks?
So many things. I have been diving a lot back into Byron Katie. I think I might have mentioned it on our interview, but I've now, she's become, rather than just a book, my next rabbit hole. So I've been reading all of her books and really just to kind of seal in the lessons. But I think it's been really helpful for what is happening in the world, because I do a lot of research on what is not being said and like, I don't know. And so I went through a period of time where I was sharing a lot of it and feeling gaslit by society. but now I'm kind of realizing people are set in their ways, and instead of like thinking I'm going to share information that might change somebody's mind, it's more about how can I balance acceptance while being the change I want to see in the world. And a lot of that's coming back to just reminding myself that I can't be 100% certain about anything that's going on. As much evidence as I've compiled, I honestly cannot be 100%. There's always room for doubt, no matter what argument you're having with somebody, no matter how much you research anything, absolutely anything, whether it's current events or how to raise a baby or,
has there been anything that you've felt really strongly about and then slowly or quickly flipped the side you were on?
Yeah. I mean, when COVID first went down, I just jumped on board. I got a mask. I was wearing a mask while like grocery shopping and wiping down my groceries. That's what they said to do. But it took about 2 weeks for me to flip sides on that. So by end of March 2020, I flipped completely.
That's interesting.
My life.
I feel like it took me quite a bit longer, and mostly it was just that I wasn't that engaged. I was really enjoying there were no cars on the street, and I was like, I could just ride down the middle of the street on my bike, and it's like I like it when people aren't out harassing me.
Yeah, my brain works in a particular way where like I'll retain a lot of information, and it's like every detail will pop up when something all of a sudden doesn't fit in the story I've been telling. So it only takes one small piece of evidence that I'm like, wait, that doesn't fit in this. Like something feels off about that. And then I cannot help myself. I will go down like a week-long rabbit hole of barely sleeping, like to the point that like, I mean, it's the ADD side of me. It's when I hyper focus on things that I'm interested in, and like my husband will have to come out and be like, babe, I need to warn you, you need to sleep. Like, like it's 4 a.m. right now. You're scrolling on your phone. Or like there was one night that I actually got into bed and I was like wide awake, and I had to get back up out of bed because I could not sleep and I could not stop thinking about things. And so I was reading books that were coming out, and like older books on corruption in specific industries that were making the choices. And within a week, I was just like, nope, like something's off here. And I'm not saying that the virus wasn't real, that people aren't getting hurt. My aunt-in-law died of COVID. And so I get people's fear. And I also became very sure of corruption. And I still lean that way. If I had to bet on it, that's where I lean. But like I said, right now I'm stepping back and there's only so much you can do by following a trail of a specific belief. And so I had to come back and realize, well, what can I do? And I know that all change is done based on my vibration, and going down dark into the rabbit hole and like surrounding myself with all these what ifs and this is what they're pushing towards and this is what could be. I don't know that for sure at all. You know, as much evidence as I've found, I have to remind myself that I don't know that for sure. And so now the last few months, especially, I've just been focused on that vibration. And I also don't ever want people to think that I am against them because of what they believe. And I have a lot of family members that I love that are completely on the opposite side. And I hate the division that has happened with so many people in the past few years. So I've also been, I've taken it as my stance to kind of be a bridge and help people find acceptance within beliefs and acceptance of what is currently happening and all of that.
Yeah. What do you do with that? Do you just like not talk about the things that you know you're going to fight about, or what's your approach? I
have a little mental conversation with myself of reminding myself that I don't know what is 100%. So I have to start there. Like, do I know, as Byron Katie says, is that true? Can you absolutely know that that's true? And when it comes down to everything, no, I can't. Remind myself that I'm likely not going to change somebody else's mind. So do I want to get into an argument right now, or do I want to use this as a learning moment for myself? And so I like to come at things with curiosity, because the thing is in the beginning, when I had all these beliefs and I'm in a way thinking I'm not, but actually am, kind of pushing them on somebody else, or being like, no, just see this. If you knew everything that I knew, if you uncovered everything I knew, you would see the way that I see. But why am I invested in that? Number one, what is that going to do for me? Like, what am I really going to change the world one person's opinions at a time? Likely not. Usually what happens is I know that people have presented evidence for me when I'm really set in my ways, and they present evidence that goes against that, and it's real solid evidence. I'm a very open-minded person and I will eventually sway, but my first reaction is resistance, because it's threatening to my belief system, which is my reality. And so understanding that's how somebody else is going to perceive it, how can I have this conversation without an agenda? How can I have this conversation without creating resistance in somebody else? Because that's not the energy that I wish to spread. And so now I ask a lot of questions. I still will share things on my own, or have my beliefs. Maybe it'll crack mine, maybe it won't, but I have found that I am a happier person when I seek to understand why somebody believes something, rather than seeking to change what they believe. And it just makes it a lot more bearable to be in a world full of different beliefs when that's the goal instead of the opposite.
I feel like the goal, it's like a unconscious and sometimes conscious goal that I have, is like, I want people to wake up, and that can mean different things. Like, perhaps it's this like feeling we're on an ascension process. Like it's of benefit to all of us to sort of raise our frequency, raise our vibration. And so it feels kind of like an obligation to try to elevate people, and, you know, like presenting scientific facts or presenting like whatever, like doesn't seem to do that. So I kind of have this, like, is it the best just to like be happy and peaceful and loving myself and just like lead by example, or is there something else I could be doing outwardly that would help the whole process?
I think there's both, honestly. I contemplate this a lot too. Like I once did an episode last year on like the difference between like how to balance acceptance and activism. how do you go out and seek to actually make real change and do things? Because there are things you can do in the world to make change. But there's also a level, I think, to be happy and to raise your own vibration of acceptance, so that it's kind of this weird thing. And I think for me, that comes with, before I share something, to check in with myself and ask what energy I'm doing this from. Is it from a place of inspiration? Like that, when I'm inspired, like usually I differentiate even when working on my goals through, okay, am I doing this based on fear or inspiration? And so those are the two kind of balancing points, but it can also be like this charge of anger through a share, like, oh my God, this meme hits the nail on the head, must share to everybody. Like, is it that, or is it like, or is it a calmer energy of like, yes, this is going to flow through me and I'm going to multiply it in a way. And so checking in with myself on what energy I am sharing from is the first part. And then the other part is, what am I expecting from this? Am I doing it without expectations? Am I doing it out of love? Like, or am I expecting people to read this and be like, oh my God, the last 2 years, everything I've believed is just gone. Thanks for this meme, Melissa. Like, I'm on the whole other side. Like, that's just not going to happen. And so, and I think anyone can feel an expectation put on them by what you're sharing, or if you're doing it from like this ego place of like kind of a smug share of like calling the other side stupid. Like, there's a lot to kind of check in with. And now the more, it used to take me minutes per post, like, okay, is this okay? But now I'm like, all right, I know where this is coming from. I'm going to pass. And that alone is a skill, to be able to scroll past something that fires you up. Like, that is another piece of my motivation. Am I strengthening a neural pathway of impulsiveness and of the ego side of me? Or am I practicing letting go, just as I do in meditation, where yes, a triggering thought comes, or a thought that seems to need action comes, and I let it float by? So they're both kind of one and the same practices.
So you really do this. You really check in with yourself before.
If you've seen the phases I've gone through of not doing that, then yeah. Like, in order to have not overwhelmed or lost a ton of followers or whatever, like I've gone through waves of the last 2 years of what I'm sharing for, like really thinking that I was changing things in a specific way and realizing I wasn't, and having to kind of revert course. But especially since I've had a baby, I have like little bits of anxiety for the first time, and you can't really tell it's happening from the outside, but all of a sudden I'll be sitting there and it's like reality is too loud, and I'm like, oh, this is anxiety, I think. And a lot of it was because of the circumstances that are happening in the world, and like, what is the world going to be like for my baby? And I know that I create a reality based on what I believe. And so while I was in a way like the ego side of me thinking I was changing other people's beliefs, really I'm actually strengthening beliefs for a crazy, dark, dystopian world that might come to fruition. So that wasn't helping anybody. So yes, now I do really check in with myself, or I have apps on my phone to block other apps. I have times where I like there's this app called Opal that during specific times that I know that I fall into like a scrolling pattern, it just blocks all of those apps. And so I open them and it won't load new content. And I'm like, and
wow.
I'm like, why won't this load? Oh yeah, your higher self set this in motion for you. Put the phone down, go do something better.
So you've got interesting like fail-safe systems you put into your thinking and your phone, and like different practices to like keep you from bouncing off too far to some extreme, it sounds like.
Oh yeah, I am an extreme personality. I always have been. It's what's gotten me into a lot of trouble, and it's what's brought a lot of great things into my life. So I know I need to manage my impulses, and there's a time to practice just not acting, and then there's a time to have the backup plan. Stupid example, I used to have a pretty bad eating disorder. I was bulimic for over 10 years. And so I know that there's still those neural pathways, even though I've been on that healing journey for a really long time. But I have to have the mindfulness techniques in place. But my one weakness is still chocolate. And 90% of the time, yes, I can have a piece of chocolate and let it sit. But that 10% of the time, I will eat 3 packets of the Trader Joe's sunflower buttercups because they are amazing. And so every week when I go down the mountain for my yoga class, I go to Trader Joe's, stock up for groceries, bring it back up the mountain. And I have a buttercup for every single day. And I give them to my husband and he hides them. And he rations them to me 1 per day only. And there was one time I found the hiding spot and it was one of those weekdays and I ended up eating 3 packets of the buttercups. And so sometimes the hiding place changes. It's like a really big, like it's a thing in our household. Like, I'm like, can you just
is that even worth it though? Like, I mean, what would happen if you just like ate all of them, you know, but ate them all the day you bought them and then just didn't have any for the rest of the time?
Self-loathing spiral. So there's still things that are connected. And one day I hope to get there. And I thought I was, and then the buttercup binge happened. And then I had the spiral. It brought up other feelings. Like for me, it's kind of like food is such an interesting one, because if I was addicted to alcohol, you just don't keep alcohol in the house, right? But do you have the bottle of gin right there and you're like, well, whatever. If I end up having a sip and I drink the whole bottle, it's just one slip up. Like, people don't think that way when it comes to those things. And because it's food and it's still something that we need to survive, it's like for a long time, I cut out all of the trigger things. But then what kind of life is that? I need a buttercup every now and then. And so now, you know, it is worth it. And also I think my husband likes the power a little bit. That's the one thing I give him power over. He's like, have you been good? And I'm like, yes. Buttercup, please.
That seems like something you could work into the bedroom, you know?
Yeah, right? I mean, whatever works. I do sometimes have to seduce him for it. So
one thing that I've been considering recently, like I was building this nice wine collection. I was like, ooh, this will be a fun adult thing to do. And the last few times I've had wine, like single glass, I'm hungover. I don't have a rich dream time, which is really important to me. And it's like, fuck, I can't even enjoy a glass of wine anymore. And it's interesting to like see things leave my life, not because I like set up I locked them in a cabinet, but because it's just like not worth it anymore. And it's like kind of disappointing. But at the same time, you know, I'm not willing to have a morning where I feel sluggish. So it's just out the window. So
yeah.
If anybody wants a nice bottle of wine, come on over.
I know. Well, I actually was going through the same thing. And I used to drink heavily as in my 20s. Like I was just a huge party girl. And then, you know, I kind of stopped wanting to go out, but I would still drink wine at home. And then I was pregnant, so didn't drink, and then had a baby, and then would have a glass of wine here and there. And at the end of the day, it would like feel like a reward. And I could tell that I was attaching those two things, like a productive day and a glass of wine to wind down. And I noticed too, even halfway through a glass of wine, I was a little bit less present with my son if he was still awake. I was a little bit less likely to go create content or do something in my business. I wanted to just sit there and like watch a show. And so I cut out alcohol just a little over 6 months ago and I haven't had any since. And I wasn't doing it forever. I wanted to just do an extended period of time. At first it was 6 months. Now 6 months has passed and now I'm like a year, but honestly, I feel so much better without it. I mean, I think as we age, it changes the way we relate to things as it is. And that's how it's been with everything. I mean, I used to do party drugs like all the time. And actually in the midst of my partying, at this time, this was during my unhealthy years, that's still the downward spiral. I was doing Molly like 4 to 5 times a week, and I would do like anywhere from 4 to 8 pills in a night because we'd be up all night. That's a lot of MDMA to be doing. And then one day it's like my body was like, nope, you're going to grow out of this. And I was still mid-20s, like thinking I wanted to party for a few more years. And I would take one pill and just pass out. Like it used to keep me up all night long, and instead my body just shut it off. The same thing happened before that with cocaine. I thought it was a fun party drug, and then one day I did a line and just hated it. It was like death becomes her and just never did it again. And so everything that I've ever stopped until really, well, yeah, pretty much everything I've ever stopped other than maybe being bulimic. That one actually took a conscious effort to be unaddicted to, but everything else just sort of like my body has its own mechanism for rejecting it.
I've never done cocaine, and it's on my bucket list. And I also want to go down to South America and like chew some coca leaves, you know, like go to some high elevation and chew coca leaves to see what all the fuss is about.
Well, honestly, in the beginning of that experience, it was fun. Actually, the very beginning, I was like, I don't feel anything. So I was expecting to like have some mind altering thing, but then it just made me like the most confident woman in the world. And I just felt great. And no downsides for a little bit. And then the downsides came. It was actually the first year I'd started doing cocaine was in college. And it was the year after my dad died and the first Father's Day without him. And so the night before was one of my friend's birthdays. And we stayed up all night doing cocaine. One of those things where it's like, okay, every line we do, Melissa will do too, because she's going to have a hard day. Like, let's get her through this. And instead I was coming down on the first Father's Day without my dad, and it was to this day one of the worst days of my life. I learned my lesson for a few years, then restarted the habit when I moved to Texas and kind of did it periodically. Then when I came to LA, did it a lot with people because it was always free. And and honestly, it's just like I look at it now as just this little substance that kind of steals your soul. Especially knowing how I am now, like it's so out of alignment. Yeah. One
thing that I've actually really, I also never smoked weed until much later. And I've started experimenting with microdosing edibles, like microdosing mushrooms, but microdosing marijuana edibles. And what I notice is that we have a lot more dance parties, like me and my kids. And we end up doing like elaborate story times, and it's so much fun. I feel like it's like the perfect thing for parenting, you know, because we spend an hour like telling a bedtime story, and it just gets more and more elaborate because because I'm not shutting down their like wild, crazy ideas so much.
Yeah, I mean, I still love cannabis, but if it became something where I was reaching for it in certain moods, I would probably deter it. I'm just very conscious of creating connections with things. Like that was one of the hard things about giving up alcohol was I'd walk by a beautiful patio on a Sunday and I'm like, Sunday fun day, or like having a cocktail to commemorate the travel experience. I was like, well, now this part is standing out more than the overall experience. And so whenever that starts to happen, it's like, oh, I need this, or it's the time for this. Then I'm like, nope, take a step back, create a new association. But as of now, yeah, cannabis is great for, you know, just the end of the day, sleeping a little bit better. And I do have my nightly non-alcoholic cocktails. And one of my favorites is this one called 3 Spirit. It's actually called Nightcap. And it has a little valerian root in it, which is almost a natural sedative. And I sleep so well. You only have to drink 3 ounces of it. And it tastes like a delicious, like semi-spicy cocktail. So good. I'm not a rep for them, but I should.
Valerian root, yeah. I think I sometimes I take a lucid dreaming supplement. And so there's like falling asleep.
Galantamine or something?
Galantamine is in one of them, yeah. And so there's like, this one is in 2 phases where it's got a couple herbs to like put you in a deep sleep. And then in the middle of the night, you take the huperzine and the galantamide, whatever it is.
I was probably pronouncing it wrong. Never double check this. So I'm going to go with yours.
And then so then you start lucid dreaming sort of halfway through the night because it sort of shifts your state. seems to work pretty well.
Yeah, I've tried it. I have that still. I went into this huge lucid dreaming phase. And then the moment I accomplished it, I was like, okay, on to the next one.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't know why. I've always been like that. Like a lot of people go into like the master of something, and I'm like, just wanted to see the experience. Let's go to the next. But I did have a pretty incredible lucid dream a couple months ago for no reason. And it made me re-excited to go back into it. So I might start taking my nightly drugs.
What'd you do with your lucid dream?
It was different than all my other lucid dreams because first of all, when I first started lucid dreaming, it was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. What can I do here? I had never tried to fly for some reason. So it was only like semi-lucid. This one I actually did. I'm like, well, let's see if I can catch some air. And I started bouncing. And I would bounce, and then all of a sudden it seemed like I was in like a festival similar to Symbiosis or Lightning in a Bottle, one of those hippie-ish type festivals rather than like Coachella. And they usually have these tents set up, and so I started bouncing, and the tents were appearing, and all these spiritual people started appearing. And at the same time, I'm like, what can I gather? I pictured it almost being like accessing the Akashic records, where I'm like, okay, I'm outside of the limitations that I'm in the earthly world. Can I access information? And then I started just trying to download things. And it was like I was getting this greater understanding of the whole world. And it was one of the things similar to how we talked about earlier, where I've been shifting my focus to like, okay, well, how can I seek truth? And transforming that into realizing that most truth isn't absolute except for love. And it was a realization of that, where all of a sudden I was overwhelmed with this feeling of love, similar to how I felt when I did 5-MeO-DMT. It was just like this brush over me, and not just an acceptance, but an understanding of why everything needs to be the way it is, why everyone needs to believe what they believe. And then I woke up and I just felt lighter. Like it was like therapy, like years of therapy in one night, or just kind of stripping me of my own delusions.
That sounds amazing.
It was really cool. I woke up and was like, oh my God, I just did that on accident.
I'm so excited to share. Like, I like sharing my dreams in general, just because it's fun to see other people interpret them. But especially when I have a lucid dream, I'm like so excited to share. And the default that I have is I'm always like, okay, better practice my manifesting. So like generally the first thing I'll do is try to like just manifest a bunch of like really wild things into the scene, just to prove like, okay, my law of attraction skills are working really well. So the last one I had, I was like, okay, I'm going to bring my kids in. So they like popped in to the scene, and I was like, okay, great. Now I need to give them a present. And then these like two giant gems appeared in my hands, and I gave them to them. And it was like, so there's a specific mineral called tanzanite, which is this like deep blue purple, and it looks just like the blue lotus flower. And so like when you turn the gems in a specific way, it was a blue lotus. And blue lotus is used by the Egyptians theoretically for like enhanced lucid dreaming, which is kind of a cool thing. So I ended up like giving them these two gifts of these jewels in the dream, and I was like, okay, let's accomplish my first mission there. I always check. I'm like, so then I like wake my kids up, or I talk to them in the morning. I'm like, so did you see me in your dreams last night? Like, did you get anything special? I like try to quiz them to see if they picked up any of the stuff. And sometimes they do, which is really wild. Like sometimes they'll tell me my dream back to me in some slightly skewed way, but not that time. They didn't remember.
That's funny. That reminds me of one of my ayahuasca experiences. Was it the first one? Yes, it was the first one. And so I had no idea really what to expect. And I took the ayahuasca, and then I sat there and I was like, I don't really feel anything. And then I took a little bit more, and then it started to hit me. And my husband was doing the experience with me, and he has been with me when I've taken too much mushrooms or too many mushrooms, and so he has this natural, like, let me make sure she's okay before I allow myself to like receive it all. And so we were in that state, and I started crying for some reason. One of the first experiences I had was feeling like a presence of my dad. And so I start crying, but I'm like barely teetering. I'm going in, but I'm kind of still attached to reality. And it's because he keeps putting his hand on me or being like, you're okay. You're in a room full of people. You took drugs. There was one time when we took mushrooms and I kept saying like, what is happening? And he'd be like, it's okay. You took mushrooms. And I'd be like, oh, okay. And so he was,
who did this to me?
And the shaman had already coached us, like, be in your individual world. Like, you'll take people out of it if you try to interact. But he was worried about me. And so he was kind of in that mindset. And so finally, like, I was like, in my higher self, and it's like, how do I say this while appreciating his love of caring for me and also letting him release and have his own experience? And so finally I just like put my hand on him and was like, it's okay, you're off duty. And we both just start cracking up, and then we went deeper into it. But at first I couldn't figure out how to like get this across until I said, you're off duty. And I kept just saying, I'll see you on the other side. I'll see you on the other side. Because I felt like I was going to the other side and then being pulled back out. And I was so sure that was what was real. The other side was what was real, that I was like, oh, this is the illusion. And so just meet me on the other side. And I thought we were going to have the same experience. And then afterwards realized we both had very different experiences, but it felt so real that was just another dimension that we could just meet on.
Although I've done that too, where it's like, I've been across the room from somebody and I'm like, hey, let's meet up in the middle of the ceremony, like on the astral plane. And then it's like, you meet them, and this happens to me a lot. Like, I see them as their spirit animal or one of their spirit animals. And I'm like, are you that? Yeah, you are. And then it's like, I have a little bit of trouble, like, cause you're like a fox now, but I know who it is because it's the same feeling when it's like next to you. This one time, the person was a beginner, was sitting next to me, and she went and she had a freak out because it was her first time, but she was still sitting there. So she was there as a fox the whole time sitting next to me, but like her 3D self, her body was away, like having a freak out, like, I don't know what's happening. And then she came back and I was like, did you know you were here the whole time? And she was like, what are you talking about?
That's so funny. Yeah. My second ayahuasca experience, I remember going into the kitchen afterwards, because we all kind of bring nourishing food and share it afterwards and talk about our experience. So it was after the experience, I had kind of come out of it, a little loopy, but the first part of it, I was like underground. And it was interesting because first it was like this little munchkin kind of elf guy was preparing me, and he was like whispering to the other elves, like, we're just getting you ready for this experience. Like, oh my God. And so then all of a sudden I descended below, almost like there was like a circle beneath me, and it just like lowered, like how they release people into a concert from the ceiling or something like that. And I'm just like being descended down. And then there's all these tubes, and it reminded me of Mario Brothers. And I was kind of trying to go through them, but I was watching these little almost gopher creatures, but they were more than that. They were like personified going through these tubes. And when I got to the kitchen after this, and I almost forgot about that, because after the underground part, then it seemed to like lift me into the light, and I was in this white space. And then I went into this kind of cave world. It was weird. There were so many levels of that experience, but then everyone started saying like they had done it a lot more than I had. And they're like, oh, did you see the underground people? And they're like, yeah. And they just start explaining exactly what I had seen. These little guys going through tubes. And she's like, yeah, I saw you down there. And I was like, what? And I didn't know these people. So I didn't even know to look for them. But she's like, yeah, you were right across the other side of the tube, and just going on. And I thought that was amazing, but I wasn't not yet at that level to have that amount of awareness. I was just taking it all in, like, whoa, what is this new experience?
So what's your current sense of like okay, 3D materialist reality, dream time. We've talked about the space that you're in when you're in ceremony and ayahuasca or mushrooms or something. Do you have a sense of how all those, like, how do you map that out for yourself in terms of like reality?
I think that there are multiple dimensions, and it depends on my level of vibration on when I'm accessing them. And I actually teeter now. Now, the whole holographic world has kind of thrown me a bit. CIA released a bunch of documents basically confirming that the world is a hologram. And then part of me is like, well, is this just some sort of psychological operation to get us to not understand our true power and to think it's all a simulation? Or is it a greater chance that this is actually a simulation, but it's part of existence anyways? This is what I evolved into this time. And so for me, a lot of times what I lean into will be what I need at the time. And that's what feels true for me. And so recently it has been that I will create or experience a different version of the exact same reality depending on what level I'm vibrating on, which is why I have been focusing more on my personal vibration, that feeling that one truth of love in my body and trusting that that's going to manifest in my material world. But it can also be why, I mean, there were experiences when I was in my 20s where I would be with one of my friends who was going through a harder time, and I'd like leave something and be like, that was amazing. And she had a whole different experience and thought it was terrible on every level. Like, oh my God, this person tried to fight us. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I did not see those people. I did not experience those people. I had a conversation with them. I've experienced this vibration and you experienced them in a whole different vibration. Like, you created an entire different scenario. And I used to think she just made stuff up. And like, I don't know what you're seeking out, but you have to see the negative in everything. And so you can look at that in like the spiritual sense of maybe she was in a different dimension while we were together. You can look at it as the people will seek negative or seek experience that confirms their current vibration. I like to see it in the more spiritual aspect. And so when I'm dreaming, I'm not confined by my own ego. And so it allows me to access different realms that are right here that I may be able to access when I'm awake if I were to rise that much higher, if that makes sense.
Yeah, your story is making me think of, so I've done a lot of adventuring, and I think really early on, I got into the ability to reframe like all the challenges as like, let's see what happens. How am I going to grow from this? And then to other people, it's still just like a miserable, it's just like too much cold rain, or like we're just too lost, or we haven't eaten in long enough. So I totally get where your friend is coming from.
I do too. And especially when my body is not comfortable, it's hard for me to access a different vibration of mind, I suppose. This one was particularly interesting though, because nothing was going on really. Like, we had minor conversations with people at like a WeWork, and I just thought we were like making small talk with people, and then we end up leaving, and she's like, they hated my boyfriend. They were making fun of his accent. I was like, I don't think anyone has ever made fun of a British accent ever, has experienced anything other than envy of a British accent, first of all. Second of all, I actually knew these people personally, and I know their hearts, and I knew they would never do something like that. And so it was just so interesting how even in something where it didn't take any effort for me to reframe it, I wasn't even trying to reframe it, and I could see how reality could be distorted depending on your state of mind. And like I said, this person was going through a really hard time. She had lost her father. She felt alone and had financial hardships. So she was already in this negative mindset that we both knew she was in. But it was so interesting knowing her so well to see it just completely transform such a mundane moment into something so terrible for her.
I've had situations where I'm like in a room of people having a conversation at some event or something. And it's like, all of a sudden I can see, it's almost like I can see their egos. And it's like, I can see that they're saying the things they're saying in order to get the people they're saying them to like feel or think a certain way. It's like everyone's persuading everyone at the same time. And you see all these like weird relationship dynamics. I haven't thought about this in a long time, but and then it's like once you see it, you can't stop seeing what's happening. And it's just like, you guys are all in a play. It's wild.
I know. I've caught myself in my own versions of a play as well. And for me, when I feel that, I'm like, well, what's coming out of me right now? Is this from my heart? What place is this from? It's kind of like how I was talking about checking in with myself when I'm sharing information. And a lot of times I gain a greater awareness of that by seeing it in other people. And a lot of times I see things in other people when it's a direct reflection of something I need to work on myself. Like, that's why it's standing out to me. That's why it's almost triggering me. And it's not in every case, but one example of this is, I know somebody that I've known my whole life, and I've always known that she does this, but she will all of a sudden, she'll say something that's true. She won't lie about the main event. But then if people aren't buying into it quickly enough, then more and more evidence seems to come out of the woodwork. Sometimes things that I myself have witnessed and knew that's not how it happened. But I'm like, okay, I get what you're doing. And the point you're trying to make is true. But all of this stuff is fluff so that they believe you. Like you're just pulling it out. And it's funny because that's like this extreme example of, and then all of a sudden, the moment that I was like kind of watching her do this in real life, this experience of my own that was on a much more minor scale popped up. And I'm like, I've done versions of that. I've exaggerated a little bit to make my point, or when people aren't reacting the way that I want. And so that was this big learning lesson to me. And that ended up being my challenge for like the 6 months after that, was to check myself and make sure. And so even things were like, no, it's like, I've done it 1,000 times. Well, don't quote me on that number. Or like, I don't know, billions of dollars went into that. Well, it might have been 250,000. I'm not sure. I'm gonna have to look up the number. The point was, it's a lot. And so I would make sure to not ever add any exaggerations, even if it was an obvious exaggeration. And that was a whole like period of my life where that was the only focus that I had. And it was because it was reflected to me in the world.
Huh. And do you think it's because we want people to just validate our experience? Like, where is that coming from?
I think it's that we hold on to our beliefs more than we think we do. And I think it's so easy to identify with those beliefs, or like even creating our own version of reality, which is why, I mean, you see a lot of gaslighting happening with people these days, like real people who've been injured from something that other people need, feel like that is the only way to save the planet type thing. And so they can't even see that maybe even if it's a small percentage, like they have been affected until maybe you know them in person. But I know 2 people personally who have had life-altering experiences from something that is now mandated to be a part of society. And it's actually really insane to hear the stories of people just turning on them because of what they've experienced. Like, one of them can't walk right now. And it's like, you're now mad at this person because they can't walk. Like, what do you mean? Or like they cut them out of their life because they're sharing that experience. And it's like, no, don't burst this bubble, because this is my hope right now. And seeing that there might be a downside, or that maybe it won't be pushed to everyone at this time because there's this minor amount of people that are hurt, like that's threatening to them. And so it's interesting. I've been observing a lot of both sides, and I can see both sides. Like, I can see why people want the light at the end of the tunnel. And I can also see why it's dangerous to not think that bodies are different.
Have you heard the Matthias de Smet, the Belgian psych professor's theory about the mass formation psychosis? And one one of the key things is that you have to offer only one solution. Like you have to funnel, like here's this huge problem and the only single way to solve it, and I have it, and here it is. And like that's part of the whole strategy there.
Yeah. I don't doubt it. And it's because I can see the glazed over look. I can see I have a family member who got GBS. I never know how to pronounce it. Is it Guillain-Barré syndrome, whatever it is, from the flu shot years ago?
Yeah.
And it happened right after that. And still, he and his wife in the beginning refused to see that connection, even though it happened right afterwards. Then it was, but it was just, they made up every excuse possible as to why their situation was different. And they still, I mean, they were the first to line up for protecting themselves from this new thing. I don't like saying the words anymore. Protecting themselves from this new thing. And yeah, it's just interesting to see, like, even asking certain questions, you know, when you can see somebody turn off and whatever, more power to them. If this still makes them feel safe, they're also creating the reality. Like if they feel unsafe not having it, who knows what that's attracting. So I'm not here to shatter anyone's reality that they are creating. I just know my own. And I also understand that I have been prepped in a certain way because I became skeptical of the pharmaceutical industry when my dad died of cancer, and they only offered one way and never told him about changing his diet, never told him anything else. And so then I started researching it after he died, and I found out that chemo only has a 2% success rate, which is about the same success rate as if you don't do anything. And I'm not saying that it's not doing anything, but I'm also saying that the last year, from the time he was diagnosed to the time he started chemo, his life was over then. He was pretty much bedridden most of the time, and then he died. And so I know he was skeptical of that, and I don't know. So I was already skeptical of that. I already began living my life in a completely holistic way. I was overprescribed drugs in my 20s. Another family member had an opiate addiction from overprescription. Like there's just so much that have made me question things. And so of course I was going to question this other thing pretty early on. It was coming from an industry that I did not trust. But I also get that other people have never had any of those experiences. And they may have had experiences where their family member was saved by the pharmaceutical or the medical industry, and their baby was saved and born prematurely or something like that. And they have the utmost trust, or they have family members that are doctors and they know their hearts and they know they wouldn't do harm. And so they have a whole different reality around it. And for me to think that there's no validity to their experience is just ego. And that's not right of me either. And to understand too, that I believe we are all aspects of God having a human experience. And so we're meant to have opposite experiences. It's the only way to have the full spectrum. And so there is value in that. And that's just something I need to trust. And I don't know if I went on a whole different tangent from your question, but that's where it came out.
Yeah, that's good. No, because it's, so if you take this perspective, if I take this perspective of, if you go back far enough, we're all fractals of the same source. And then like, it seems like we're different because we're so far down the branches. Hey
friends, I want to take a quick second to tell you about a free, no-cost business training that I'll be hosting in April. This is a 3-day event, April 19th, 20th, and 21st, and I'm calling it the Quantum Entrepreneurship Series. And this is a high-level business training for coaches, healers, and spiritual entrepreneurs. And on the first day, you're going to learn the best types of businesses. Let's call them soul-aligned business models that you can use to fuel your mission, to create freedom in your life, to live from anywhere. I've been testing this myself for almost 9 years now, and I've interviewed thousands of people. And so we're going to be distilling all that information to show you the different ways that you can earn a living and be highly abundant as a spiritual entrepreneur. Day 2, we're going to talk about the best metaphysical practices. My favorite, I've done more than 50 metaphysical experiments in the last 5 years, and I've distilled those down into the ones that are most applicable for running a business. And finally, the last day is about infinite opportunity, how to build a world-class network, and understanding the different levels of abundance so you can bring those into your business and your life. So again, this is a no-cost series. You can sign up for it now. We'll have links below this episode wherever you're listening or watching on YouTube. And you can also go to derekloudermilk.com and sign up for free there, and it will send you emails to remind you exactly when that is. But they'll be at 12 Central on those dates, the 19th, 20th, and 21st. Thanks so much. Hope to see you there.
And so I play around with like seeing, like me interviewing myself here in some way, like try to see people like actually around the dinner table looking through someone else's eyes and seeing me eating and, all this stuff. And trying to feel what it's like to not be separate. And at the same time, it's just such a, I don't know, it's just such a normal thing to like have an argument with somebody over my experience being right, your experience. I don't know. What are your thoughts about like the higher self? Like you mentioned that earlier, like how do you think about gaining benefit from a higher self perspective?
Yeah. One thing I started practicing, I was reading a lot of Paul Selig at the time, and I started playing with setting intentions to experience people at different levels. And Paul Selig did this. I went to one of his workshops, and he began as a psychic, and he has a particular way of accessing people. Like he will say, let me go to you for this. Like I'll ask him a question and I'll go, let me go to you for this. And he'll like experience a version of me that isn't my ego persona. And then he can experience somebody else and kind of get to the root of an issue. Like he did examples of this mother and daughter that were fighting. The daughter was not here. The mother was. And it's like, let me go to you for this. And it's like, you're actually fearful of this. You think it's this. And then to be like, let me go to her. And then they kind of bickered back and forth. And he's like, let me go to a higher version of her. And then he went to a higher version of her. And I was so inspired by that. And I'm like, I wonder if I can do that intentionally. And so it's something that I still play around with.
Whoa.
Where I do it, especially with my mom, because my mom is an amazing human and we have a very close relationship. And we have all the complexities of a mother-daughter relationship, especially with what I put her through in my 20s. And now I'm having a baby and she's getting a little more controlling in her age. And so there's times where she's coming at me in a way, and I am creating a story that makes me see her so one-dimensionally that I'm like, okay, I know that I am experiencing her lower self from my lower self. Can I go to a higher version? Like what is at the core of this? And sometimes just that intention softens my own energy. I can feel it in my body. And then all of a sudden I'm experiencing that exact same situation completely differently, and just seeing maybe like it turns from being this controlling moment of criticizing my parenting to, wow, she loves both of us so much that she wants the best for us in this moment. And this is how she's showing it. And all of a sudden I'm able to respond completely differently than I would have otherwise. So I do believe that we're always experiencing whatever dimension that we're currently in. We're gathering information from that vibration in order to maintain it. So we have to leave breadcrumbs from our higher selves, habits, whatever, kind of like how we leave breadcrumbs for lucid dreaming, where you like practice when you're awake so that your mind will automatically go there when you're asleep. I think it's similar to that.
Yeah, that's helpful. Can you share a little bit more about how you responded differently?
Yeah. When I feel resistance, well, I should say that there are certain times that trigger resistance in me. And when I'm feeling resistance, I react as such, like, don't penetrate me type mindset. And one example of this recently was, this is so stupid, but my mom was over and there's just a lot of things with my mom, and my mom she actually has OCD. And so, and again, I love you, Mom, if you hear this, but she, when she gets fixated on something, it's like that, it's really worrying her inside. And so it can be little things like, you should put socks on his feet. Like, they seem cold. You live in the mountains. And I'm like, I've read all these books about barefoot babies and how good it is for them to feel the earth on the ground. Like, I keep the house warm, whatever, but it really bothers her. And so a lot of times she'll keep bringing it up. Well, I was already kind of in this mindset. It was my baby's birthday. And so then the next thing that came up, we're like talking about something, and I could feel myself creating the story that, God, she's always pushing me. She's always pushing me. And I'm like, is that even true? And so Byron Katie popped into my mind. It's like, is that true? Is there a different way to experience this? And the next thing she started talking about was business cards. And we've had this conversation about business cards before. I have business cards. I'm not the best at handing them out. I am a millennial. I do a lot of things digitally. I'm like, I could text somebody my business card.
I have a podcast.
Yeah, I have a podcast. I send, I can just add them to my phone, and then I send a voice memo to them, or like I'll do an emoji little thing to stand out. So I have my own ways. I've explained this before 17 different times over the years. And so, it comes up again, and this is her idea. And so I could feel myself being about to be like, enough with the business cards. Like, I'm not going to carry them. Like, and I start to sound like a little kid brat, but instead I softened, and I'm like thinking, I don't need to, however this conversation ends, I get to choose what I do with it after that. So I can either resist, make my mom feel bad when she's like, she's not trying to, what if I experience this as she's not trying to push this on me. Instead, she wants to help. Like, all of a sudden, this story that I was holding on to started to just dissolve. I could feel it in my body. I actually feel it again right now. And this other version came through. And so clearly I could see that it makes me want to cry, because I do love my mom so much. And sometimes it's so easy to get into this other story, but my mom was an amazing mother growing up. And some of my beliefs are different than hers. She's religious. I am not. So I know that's already hard for her. And I spiraled in my 20s. I know that she questioned her own parenting and why that happened, and if she could have done anything different, because she's mentioned things that also cause resistance. I shouldn't have let you go to that college. I shouldn't have let you move out. And I'm like, what, you think you could have stopped me? I was running away from home the moment I turned 18. And so these little points of resistance, and instead of like, I should have done this, blah, 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 and I'm experiencing it as what, you would have changed my life and I would have been the person that I am today. So you're not happy with who I am today. Like, that's the story that comes out. When for her, it's, I'm so proud of you and I want to help. And that's all I've ever wanted. And so I have my way of doing it, and it might not be what you're ready to receive. And suddenly I was able to internalize that, saw it for what it was. And that stupid business card conversation, I was like, you know what? There are opportunities for me to leave my business cards, because my business cards are just my podcast art with like the website on the back. I could leave that at coffee shops. That's not a terrible idea, especially in the small little town that I live in, where people are driving up to snowboard and driving back down the mountain. Maybe some people would turn, I'm not doing anything else with them, and I printed them for some reason. So it was just this moment of like, such a simple example, but realizing how often it happens when we come to resistance. And it's like those moments on ayahuasca. Like, one of those times, it was that same friend that kept going through these negative things. And she came to me in an ayahuasca vision or experience. And it was funny because there were no words said on the other side. I was just able to like see her soul at that moment and see what she was going through. And there had been a bunch of little tensions that were building up in our friendship. And then I did ayahuasca, and all of a sudden, all of those things dissipated, and I could see what she was really going through. And so these moments in life make me realize how often I attach to a story. I attach to my own personalized version of reality that might be completely different than the other person, and how much of that resistance or that tension can be avoided just by letting go. And instead of having the energy of pushing my reality onto the other person, can I receive theirs and integrate it and then decide later what I want to do with it, and trust that just by being more open and receptive to what they're saying or what they're doing doesn't even mean I need to change, or change anything that I was going to do with that information afterwards. But there's something that I think is powerful about that process of integrating another version, like receiving another version of reality. And in my mind, I'm like integrating it and moving forward. And it allows me to move forward with my version with more acceptance for everyone else's.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I felt that love that your mom has for you as you were sharing that story. And what a wonderful gift for her too, to like actually give her a space where what she's saying can land, and to not feel she's being met with resistance. Your story of the socks reminded me of when we were living in Croatia, and it was warm there. We lived right on the Adriatic coast, like 50 feet from the water. We swam twice a day, but our kid was 1 at the time, and we didn't put socks on because it was so warm. And these grandmothers would come up and like start like yelling at my wife, like, you better put socks on this kid, and then like they had survived through all the, the Yugoslav wars there. And, like some of them still had houses with like holes in it. And we were like, gosh, maybe we should really listen to these women who are like giving us advice. And they're like, nah, just let him keep his socks off.
It's a generational thing. I've shared that story to a few different people, and they're like, they can't even get through the story. They're like, oh my God, the socks, my mother-in-law, the socks. Like anyone who's had a new baby is like, damn it with the socks, mama. Like, leave me be. But our temperatures are also very off. She's in Arizona, so she comes and I'm like, you can't be in control of the thermostat. You just turned it up to 78 degrees in our house. Like that is not what most people keep the thermostat on. So there's a lot of conversations that go back.
So I have 2 kids, and one of them is cold and one of them is hot. Like she has worn shorts and tank tops all winter long. Like you can't get her to wear warm clothes because she's just like, I am sweating. And then my 5-year-old is just like practical. He bundles up, like, so I don't know, but I have this theory that she's like bringing through extra dimensional energy, and it's just like keeping her system running really hot, so she's just got to like stay as ventilated as possible.
Could be. It could just be a higher vibration. I mean, the higher she's vibrating, the faster all her little cells are moving, and it's getting her sweaty. I think that's pretty cool.
So here's an interesting, I just learned, so speaking about like some of the interesting, ET or higher dimensional stuff. I was listening to, it was a channeled text from this race that's from the Pleiades, and they were talking about how they travel, interstellar travel. And they said, every black hole has a white hole on the other side of it, and the white hole is a star. And so every star has a black hole that is gathering the electromagnetic energy and feeding it into the white hole, which is what we see as the radiation of the sun. But they were saying you should think about the sun not as like an atomic fusion reaction, but as like a compression of electromagnetic energy. And therefore the stars are not actually hot. So you can either go into the black hole and travel that way, or you can enter from the star side and travel from star to star that way. They said that's the low tech way to do it. And then they said
sounds like a sci-fi pornography, honestly.
Yeah.
I'm here for it. Let's go.
And so they said the high tech way is you create your own mini star that opens you up to the interstar network, and you don't have to be at a star. You can just make your own and go in that way.
So how do we make our own star?
They didn't talk about that, but I imagine it's some sort of highly energetic, concentrating. You would have to like put enough energy in and then contain it in a way. But it'd be like creating a toroidal energy field that then allows you to access that. It sounded really cool, and I had this experience once of like seeing the stars as all connected, like on mushrooms, but seeing the pathways between all of them, and seeing how they actually, like neurons or like mycelia, would transmit energy or nutrition or information between them. So I already sort of had a sense of that web. But yeah, I think perhaps our governments have this type of technology. I don't know, but it could be, because it sounds fairly straightforward. Like once you get it, then you got it.
Yeah, I would be interested in exploring that as well. How much information, what things do you feel pretty sure that our government has that they're not sharing?
So I've watched quite a lot of interviews from people that either work with ET races like firsthand, or have studied the crashed material, or do like alien autopsies, like biologists that work on this. There's so many people. It's kind of astounding.
Do you believe in psyops? And how do you discern, if you do, how do you discern if some of this information is leaking that's real, or if it's some sort of psychological operation to throw us off from the truth?
There could be some small percentage that's a psyop. I think approaching it like a journalist, right? Like trying to triangulate from sources that aren't coming from the same department, or from different countries, or even corroborating it with a channeled text, which I think is extra good. Like if a guy's like, hey, I worked on this one project, and then someone else channels information that's like telling me about the same project, then I take that as like two pretty solid points of reference. And so I've sort of been building out my understanding that probably the advent of nuclear power and nuclear bombs like drew a lot more interest, because it just disrupted the space-time continuum in a way that sort of raised red flags for a lot of other interstellar species. And so I think we started having more traffic at that time in the 40s.
Yeah, some people that I follow believe that, like right now, especially is a time like other aliens, ETs, extraterrestrials have been watching planet Earth, particularly right now, and potentially saving us from destruction in different ways. I have been trying to decide if we're going to actually have an alien experience in the next few years, because I feel like it's coming, or if it's going to be Project Bluebeam and it's going to be a faked alien invasion in order to tighten control. So that's what I've been oscillating between. I just don't know what's going to happen first.
So I'm not super familiar with Bluebeam, but that's like they would use that as sort of like here's a problem we have to.
It's like a documented CIA plan that's been leaked. There's been whistleblowers, and at one point they laid out an entire plan to basically fake an alien invasion with holographic type things and make it very realistic. There's been so many more sightings of like cloaked military vehicles as of recently that, because of social media, are making its way around. And so again, you got to decipher, is this real or fake in general when you find a video, but a lot of them are pretty compelling. But yeah, so I'm not sure I don't know. There's
before the Pentagon was going to release its report last year, which was really a dud sort of report, but I wanted to preempt that by sort of establishing, like, if the Pentagon report says things that are contradicting to what I'm telling you now, because I've paid attention to this, like, you should just pay attention, like, just be alert. And I think that the number one thing that I wanted people to understand was that 99% of interactions with the rest of the universe should feel full of love and positivity. Like, you don't get to be a higher dimensional being by staying in the service to self, you know, like negative polarity. And so it's simply by the nature of how, like, you can only devolve so far. Like, you can only get more and more negatively polarized, but the, like, positive polarity scale, like, goes up infinitely. So your space for positive beings is, like, near infinite. And this is like how to think about your income too. Like, you can only save so much money by not drinking coffee, but you can, like, earn an infinite amount of money at the top end, you know? So it's like, if it's a negative thing, like, you should really consider, like, who's benefiting from it.
I agree with that completely. What are your thoughts on the idea of heaven and hell? Do you think that it's just something that we access here? Do you think, like, when people bring that stuff up, how do you interpret it?
I just had Eben Alexander on my show. He's a neurosurgeon that had this coma, and he had this basically tour of the afterlife while he was brain dead. And then he came back, and before his coma, he was like, oh, all of consciousness is just a byproduct of the chemistry of the brain. And then afterwards, he realized it's the opposite, that consciousness, the 3D reality is a byproduct of consciousness, not the other way around. Because he also realized that memories are not stored in the brain, that he remembered way more of the world from his time being dead than he ever did from being alive. And there's a lot of, there's actually like 10 million documented near-death experiences where people have sort of mapped out what happens after we die and what happens before we're born. And it's this process, like one common thing is the life review, which is like where you experience all of your interactions from the other side, the other person you're interacting with. So you can see how you made people feel, which I feel like there's a famous, I don't know if it's an Oprah quote or somebody that's like, people remember how you made them feel. Well, you actually go through that process of seeing, you review all your interactions in life and how you made people feel. And then there's like there's like 12 different stages that you sort of go through before you decide to pick a new life path and soul and incarnate. And you have a lot of help along the way from higher dimensional beings. And it's like, it's well mapped out.
I love that. I happened to do 2 interviews 2 weeks ago that were about afterlife and heaven. And I just love hearing different people's interpretations of it and like the information that they've brought back. And one of them is a guy that William Peters, he worked in hospice centers, and he ended up having an experience as a patient was crossing over, and he didn't realize that the patient was crossing right then. I mean, he knew it was coming, but all of a sudden he floated up out of his body and watched the patient float up out of his body, and his reality completely shifted. He was like overwhelmed with love and all these feelings, and like it was interdimensional basically. And he sees the other guy float out, and the other guy just winks at him, and then they both descend back into their body. Or I don't know if the dead guy descended back into his body, but William did, and went back. And then all of a sudden the other guy was gone, and he was just blown away by the experience. So started researching it, completely flipped what he thought was possible, because he was all clinical before that. And then started interviewing other people at hospice centers, people who have had dying loved ones, had experienced that. And now he's compiled like tens of thousands of stories of these same experiences and found everything that they have in common, and he calls it the Shared Crossing Project. But I thought that was pretty cool too.
And we were talking earlier about like wanting other people to validate our experience, and I feel like some of this comes from like I personally was trained as a scientist, so I had a very rigid materialist view for a long time, and then just had way too many experiences that expand that. And then I find myself wishing for other people, like, if you could just have an out-of-body experience, or if you just had a near-death experience or did ayahuasca or whatever it is, then you would know like how limiting your materialism framework is. But it's just, like, I feel like the world could benefit so much if just like more people had these expanding experiences. But I think also it comes from a place of like just wanting to have a conversation. Like, I'm loving this conversation with you because I feel like we've had so much shared types of experiences that I feel like much more at ease or at home in a way.
Well, one thing that has also helped me with my level of acceptance is realizing that some people aren't meant for that. They were here, like, have you heard about how we were moving from 3D to 4D to 5D? And if you watch the Schumann resonance of the earth, the frequency of the earth is actually rising. And Dolores Cannon talks about the 3 waves of volunteers. And so it's kind of what we were talking about before, of extraterrestrials like coming back to save Earth, seeing that it's on this downward spiral. And we all signed up to first be the first wave, the second wave, and the third wave. And so the first wave, I think I'm a part of the second wave. I think right now the babies coming in are a part of the third wave. But there are some people that have a certain density and they're not meant to rise above. And part of me has been playing around with the idea of, because I do think that even religious scripture has truth. I always seek for where it was manipulated. And so because of my being raised very religious and just it felt off my whole life. And then I got to a point where I'm like, no, I'm not going for this. But how I told you I had to find truth. I'm like, I'm going to show you the truth of this. And this is not the truth. And I'll find the evidence. And so I went down this whole rabbit hole of like the history of religion, basically, and how the Romans came in and took over, and they needed to add historical legitimacy to their reign. And so at that time, they actually did a mass printing of Bibles, and they had compiled parables and stories from all sorts of religions and belief systems. And if you're very careful, if you read the Bible carefully, you can see where the tone changes, where they start calling God by different names. And so you can see the shift in tone based on the writer. But anyways, one of the things they talk about, though, is how in the rapture, the Christians will all just be taken up. They'll just disappear from Earth, and we'll all wonder, oh my gosh. And there's even books about it. I read these books when I was a kid, the Left Behind series. And it's like this version of like everyone wakes up and all their Christian friends are just gone. And so I'm like, is that just like bullshit? Is it made up? Or what does it mean? Like, they do talk about ascension, like being taken up. What is that? And so part of me wonders if, because between Dolores Cannon saying like, there's waves of volunteers that come in and they're at different frequencies. There's other channelers that I've heard that have said things like, some people are going to maintain that density while other people are meant to rise. And I even heard one person say, and take this with a grain of salt, if you will, but saying like, some people aren't meant to survive this. And that's true on every level. It's not a mistake if somebody dies, like that was their time, I believe, the divine design of it. But part of me wonders, is it talking about this period of time where some people are ascending and old systems are melting off? Like, what if that's part of the experience of reality where we separate in a specific way, but it's vibrationally, or people die, or whatever it is? Like, what if it's a different version of ascension and it's based on our vibration? that was kind of a jumble, but it's something that I've been just thinking about and I haven't completely worked out in my head.
Yeah. I'm right there with you. Like, is it that there's going to be a 5D Earth and a 3D Earth, and they're like existing on different timelines, or is it like they're going to load people up and move them, or is it like people will leave? They'll no longer need to have physical bodies. Yeah, there's
or
a lot
maybe
of
it's all bullshit. Could be that
maybe
too.
Yeah,
You know, like
it's a good story.
but it could even be like there's been a lot of people who, and actually the last 2 years is a good example of it. There have been people that have just lived their lives and have done nothing different. And they leaned into their business when other people thought it was not the right time to put out anything new. And they were sitting at home and not leaving their homes, and they've experienced hell, while other people were like, oh, this was the best thing that ever happened to me. And so even in the same experience, depending on how you're internalizing it, you're experiencing a different version of Earth, and we still see each other. There's been more separation. And somebody even told me that there's a belief system out there that the 6 foot distance and the masking was for our highest good in a way that we didn't recognize. And it's because of the shifting of energies, and that this is a pivotal point in certain people's ascension and certain people's stagnation, to where that distance that has been created between parties was so that you could ascend without being anchored down. Again, take it with a grain of salt. But sometimes I just like to play with these ideas, sit with it for a second, see how it feels. Maybe it's not true at all, but does it help me get on with my day a little easier? Sometimes.
Sometimes I like to think about, like, what if I took a presumption and like flipped it around? Like, what if the Taliban were the good guys, or like, what if Putin is like a good guy for
There's
invading?
A whole school of people that believe that Putin is invading Ukraine to stop the New World Order, and that most governments are in on it right now. And then, of course, then little videos come out that then spur all the theories. Like a Ukrainian woman was on the news saying, we are here protecting our people. We're protecting freedom. We are protecting the New World Order. And we're like, is that lost in translation? Did you confirm? I don't know. And again, I'm not sharing this because I am saying anything that I believe, but it's just, that's one thing that I've realized when, because I spent a long time on one side of my liberal ideas and seeing people in the beginning of like 2016 when Trump was elected. And I was just like, I do not understand how anyone can make any excuses for this man. Like, look at these sound bites that we're experiencing. And then I made it a whole mission in the beginning of the pandemic to understand where people were coming from. And at the very least, regardless of what I ended up falling into, which really most of my beliefs ended up falling into, I can't be 100% sure about anything. And I don't know what's going on, and I have no idea what's going on, but they didn't see that version of him. They saw all these different clips. They saw clips that I never saw about talking about how the world is run by corporations and that he's there to destroy that. And so they really thought, like, a whole school of people believe that somebody's going in there to infiltrate it. And honestly, how do I know that we see how much somebody can be smeared, how much the media will attack somebody and make you think that they are the devil? So I know that nothing I know about that man is 100% true. Nothing I know about even what's going on, what side I landed on, can I know is 100% true, because there are powers that all have their own interests. And so whenever
one thing we know for sure is that, like, people have agendas.
And people have agendas and follow the money. And so even if some of those details aren't true, some of them are. And so what feels right to me in this moment? What decision can I make based off of love? And how can I be the one to change? Like, how can I vote with my dollars and act in the way that I wish more people would act, like model through example, rather than saying, you believe this and that's bad, and you believe this and that's bad, because I haven't lived their life. I don't have their experiences. And it is wrong for me to invalidate their experience, even if their experience is not valid for mine, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I was interviewed Charles Eisenstein recently, and he was saying, like, what if to fix our problems, like, we don't need to do anything? Like, what if thinking we need to solve our problems is a symptom of why we have problems? You know, like, what if it's not like we have to convince, or we have to go out there and like take some actions and like feed the people or fix the system? It's because those are all the same thing. Like, it's this fundamental story of like, I'm different than you, and therefore like we need to do. But the new story is like, it's just, you just be in a certain way, and that will just create the conditions to give rise to like the solutions we've been looking for.
I completely agree. That's part of the inspiration for my shift in how I'm handling things. And it's still easy for me to get caught up in what I think is happening and wanting to share. But years ago, it was actually at that same workshop that I brought up earlier with Paul Selig, and I asked him a question. And at the time I was like trying to figure out what direction I wanted to go with my life. And I just wanted outside clarity. Like, I had been swirling in my head too much. What do you see? And he goes, let me go to you for this. And he will like take on your personality. And he goes, and he's like, you, it's just a little of this, a little of that, a little of this, a little of that. Like this side, that side. He goes, you're always doing and seeking. And he said, what you need is to just be. Stop doing and start being. And I was like, what kind of vague bullshit is that? But then I sat with it for a while, and that piece of advice has popped up more than maybe any piece of advice in my life. And the understanding that was a seed planted. And again, it was like my inner resistance of like, no, I want you to tell me, like, go be a coach or go do this. Like tell me who to contact to make my life better. But it planted a seed that ended up, it's still growing, and I'm still seeing different levels of what it means to just be and the power that has.
So funny. I work with the shaman, and he's like, okay, what's the secret to be happy? Step 1, just be happy. Like, okay, what should I do here? Like, whatever you want. Like, God damn it. It's so simple. How much are you relying on outside sources, psychics, intuitive guides, whatever, versus your own, just whatever being? Do you still rely on outside people like Paul?
I wouldn't call it a reliance as much as a guidance. And I go through cycles with everything. And it's funny because with the cycles that I go through, I had less of an understanding of them before. So for example, I'd be like super productive for a few months, and then all of a sudden had no motivation to be productive in that way, but I'd be like forcing myself to show up, and it wouldn't be the same, and my mindset would be different, and it would create this feeling of burnout. And then I realized that I go through cycles. It was actually learning about working with my female cycles and how most of a workday is actually created on the masculine cycle, which is a 24-hour period, whereas female cycles are in a 28-day period. And so I did an episode on that once about working with my cycles and understanding, like, this is the point that tends to be productive going out into the world. This is the point where you go back and hibernate and you receive. And so I began balancing my masculine and feminine energy. But on a grander scale, I go through different cycles too of consumption versus creation. And so I will read a bunch of books and be obsessed with like going on long walks and listening to audiobooks. And then I won't want to listen to anything. And I know that's my time. Whereas before I used to then kind of beat myself up and be like, oh, are you getting lazy? Like, do you just want to watch Netflix instead? Like, what you just want to sit there and lay down? And I started to realize, wait, this is the perfect time actually for more meditation and for more sitting with myself and receiving what there is outside of those more tangible sources. And so right now I've been in a educational consumption, but just as of like 6 days ago, I felt myself pulling out of that. And so now I've been making a priority to meditate more regularly again, and to just write more, have things come from myself rather than from those outside sources. But I do trust that there'll be another season for that type of consumption, or that type of just outside inspiration.
Yeah, that's super cool to think about. And I love thinking about different cycles and either as as an oscillation or as a spiral, like you're coming back to the same place, but you've grown since the last time you were back here. So it's like you're experiencing the same situations, but from a slightly more evolved perspective. And that's cool. It's something as a man, I would probably have never even thought that was a thing.
Well, share the info with your wife, because it's been life-changing for a good amount of people. I think women are hard on ourselves as it is. And that was a really big struggle for me, like doing and creating and feeling really proud of myself, and then falling out of that, and then just beating myself up. And so it would create a self-belief of like, maybe you're not meant for this. Maybe you don't have the endurance for success. Maybe you can't do this. And when I started being okay with that and just accepting it and being like, okay, well, now I'm going to plan my creation. Like, okay, yeah, I'll be working on a new course or whatever at this period of time, but at this period of time is just for inspiration or learning or just kind of enjoying that, outsourcing during those times. And so it's played a pretty key role in what I've been capable of. And it's really just shifting my beliefs around what those, or really not deciding what meaning I'm going to give that. And I think we create meaning around so many things, and that meaning is what creates the self-belief, which then is what spurs or inhibits our action and what we actually do in the world. So that was a game changer for me.
Yeah, I definitely notice my own judgments around like my wife goes through cycles where she's like, she'll say like, okay, I'm just going to rest for a few days and like not do anything. And I'm like, that makes me anxious. I'm like, how could you just want to not do something for like a whole week? And she's like, yeah, that's just what I should be doing right now. I'm like, okay, all right. I trust you, but like, I need to do something. I'm going to go do something for you.
I just read this thing that said that there have been studies that have equated what women feel around the time of their periods to a heart attack. And it's actually very similar in the pain scale or something, depending. I don't really have those negative side effects, but a lot of people I know.
So you're saying heart attacks really aren't that bad?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. But it's like, we just get up and go to work through it, and we'll like boardroom. I saw this meme, and man, it's gross, but I'm going to share it with you verbally. But it's like, it was just this picture of like this woman just like totally calm, standing in front of like a room of people. Looked like she was about to give a presentation, but the caption on it was like something like, the greatest superpower was feeling like a blood clot slowly gush out and keeping a straight face in front of a room full of people. I'm so sorry, listeners. That was horrible of me to give you that visual, but I laughed so hard because I think most people have been in that situation where you know exactly what's happening. That's where your focus is, but you're in the middle of a conversation. It's just like, women are superheroes. You deal with that. Yes, let her rest is what I'm saying.
Yes, she gets to rest. And that probably would have grossed me out a lot more if I hadn't,
watched her give birth.
Exactly. Yeah. I got to deliver both my kids, which was really amazing. And so it's like, it's kind of gross.
Oh yeah, 100%. I was like, I promise you I'm not going to poop a little, but I pooped a little. So there's that.
So your kid is a year-ish?
He just turned a year on February 24th.
Oh, well, happy birthday to him, right?
Yeah, little Bravery.
Bravery. That's a cool name. How'd you come up with that name?
When we were like thinking about having a baby, we would go to this park up in Brentwood in Los Angeles that just overlooked like the whole city. And we're sitting there, and for some reason we were just coming up with baby names. And there were certain letters that we wanted, but I wanted something meaningful. Brave came up and I loved it. And then my husband a few weeks later was actually like, what about bravery? Then he can choose. And bravery is one of those names too, where it sounds like Avery. So it actually sounds very similar to a name that already existed, but it was super unique, which I wanted. And then, yeah, he can go by Brave. We call him Bravey. And then his middle name is Summit, because we met in the mountains and now we live in the mountains. We moved back to actually have a baby up here. So his middle name is Summit.
Yeah, that's so cool. That was one of my favorite things. It's kind of like when you're launching a new company or something and you're like, what are we even going to call this? And it's like a creative project, but you're really just getting divine inspiration, to like give them the right name.
I know. I hold a lot of importance to names. I worked for someone that actually had multiple successful businesses, but like didn't consider, like held no value to a name. So we just like come up with something. Example, I'm going to switch the letters so you can't look it up, but like DMT Mobile. And then he forgot what those words, like what the letters stood for. So when I was working there, he had no idea what the first ones were. Like, I'm like, this has to be my email address. Make it something cool. And then he ended up spawning off another company, and it didn't end up becoming a company. So I will share this one, but just decided to call it Jericho. That's a biblical term. He didn't know that even about the meaning of Jericho in the Bible. I can barely remember it, but it was also just spelled completely different. He's like, that's the name. I'm like, what? No, let me name the company, please.
Jericho was where they used sound vibrational technology to dissolve the walls. This is like a real weird weapon that they talked about.
In the Bible?
Like. Yeah.
There was a Battle of Jericho.
Battle of Jericho, and they brought down the walls of Jericho by using vibrational sound technology, and it dissolved them into sand or something like that.
I am going to need to revisit that story because I haven't heard it since I was like 7 years old, and the visuals were very different back then.
Well, and I could be totally off, but that's the story that I have. About
keep
that.
it, because that's a better one than the one I formed, the memory I formed.
What was I going to say about names? I don't remember. Oh, I was going to ask you, you moved back to the mountains. You talked about people coming up to go snowboarding, and I don't think I was aware of, are you guys living in a ski town or a mountain town?
Yeah, just about 2 hours away from Los Angeles, Big Bear Lake. We met up here, and I lived here for 1.5 years when I first met my husband. But then I was like, oh, it's too boring up here. It's been weeks since I've seen someone without a beard. And so we decided to move. That's when we got married. We ended up traveling around Europe for a while, and then we road tripped to the United States, and then we landed in New York and kind of just lived there. We decided to live there for 5 months. Then we moved to Santa Monica, and then we were in Santa Monica for a few years. But once the world shut down, I was just in the mindset that I needed to get into nature. And so we decided to move back to Big Bear, and I love it. It's great.
We went to Big Bear once I was going to try to teach my wife to ski, but she got altitude sickness or something, and she still hasn't learned to ski. But it was nice. It was cute. I could see myself living there.
It's adorable. And I like that it's somebody called it, one of my friends called it a mountain island. And I was like, oh, that's kind of a cool way to look at it, because it's just this little town. It's the only thing up, but it's a beautiful drive down the mountain, 2 hours from LA, like I said, so I can still go to the different events that I still wanted to go to. There's not a yoga studio that I love up here. It's all like beginner stuff. And so it's my weekly routine to drive down the mountain, and I make a whole day of it, get a pedicure.
That's what you're talking about with the candies too. Yeah. Okay.
So every weekend I get to do that, and it's
a supply run of various
solo
sorts.
Time. The hardest part though was getting rid of the conveniences of living in a city. So I was ready to, but it was almost like realizing you have all these mini addictions. It's like, oh my God, I'm hungry. Just call Uber Eats or take an Uber across town or whatever. And so then at first it just felt like I was starving all the time. There were no options. but it was good because it comes back to that idea of like using your limitations as guideposts. I'm like, okay, well, what do I need and what are my options now? And so now I heavily rely on like things like Green Chef and Thrive Market and Vitacost. So I do all my shopping online. And I even have a meal delivery for my dog. He gets Farmer's Dog. And for a while in the beginning of feeding my baby solid foods, we did like Tiny Organics and Raised Real. So you just have to plan ahead more and create that in your schedule. But now I love it even more. It's like, I feel like I have more control over my life than just like feeling so reliant on like the coffee shop down the street.
How's the community there?
It's pretty good. There's a Facebook group called Big Bear Mamas. And so there's little events for kids and whatever. And I had a midwife when I delivered my baby, and she was at the other side of the mountain down in Apple Valley. And it's just interesting because she connected me with somebody up here that had just delivered a baby that lived in Big Bear. And so now she and I and her husband, or actually boyfriend, are friends. Like, so we hang out as couples. And then I was on a walk around here and I saw a mom. And here's the thing, I've moved a lot. So I'm really good at like making new friends where I go. I've moved a lot since I was in my 20s. And so I just will shamelessly like find the Facebook groups that exist and post like, hey, I'm new here. I need friends. These are the things I like to do. These are the things I'm willing to meet up. And that's how I meet people. And so I've done that up here. But also when I'm on a walk and I see somebody pushing a stroller, I'm like, hey, you're a mom. I'm a mom. Like, that was really how the conversation went. Then I like ran up to her while I was like carrying my baby in the carrier. And I was like, hey, other moms, we gotta like form our little co-op. And I just start making conversation. And she had my midwife too. And
oh, wow.
You end up really, if you just connect through your midwife or something like that, like you end up having a ton of things in common, because the type of person that gets a midwife tends to have specific ideas of things. And
like, yeah, you're pre-screened for certain values.
Yeah, there's a lot of points of connection on the way we view the world. So
that's great. I don't know if you could tell, but we're sort of like, we're talking either about building a community, like buying land and building a community, or finding the right town. And so it's this big process of like, do we want to split our time? Do we want to, do we want to fully move to a mountain town? It's a pain in the butt.
I love that idea. That's been one of my dreams my whole life, is just to like live in a little like commune, basically. Like, I watched that Netflix show, Wild Wild Country. Have you seen that by a chance? Mm-hmm. It's one of those shows that's actually worth a watch. It's based on true events of, what's the spiritual leader's name? Osho, yeah. Osho, yeah. And so it's actually the events that happened when they created a commune. And it's so interesting. There are so many twists and turns to that story. But I was watching it, and I actually texted my friend in the middle of it. I was like, I would have been a Rajneeshi, or whatever they were called, that they called themselves, the little followers of it. I'm like, I love all their ideals. Apparently they were the bad ones. But she's like, I actually was. It turned out she lived in an ashram and in Australia that were followers of Osho, and she told me all these experiences about it. But I've been looking for that kind of community. And ironically, my husband's family they bought 100 acres of land and split it between family members. And it took me like 3 years into the relationship to be like, wait, that's the commune I've always dreamed of. Like, because a chunk of that land is ours. We're going to be building something on it for summers and whatever. But
in California?
And I would keep saying like, I just really want to live in a commune. And he's like, we have it. And I don't know how many times he said that, and it just like went straight over my head. And then one day it was my own idea. Do you know that your family basically has a commune? It's like, I've said this to you so many times. I'm like, I vaguely remember hearing that voice float by.
Oh, that's hilarious.
I had to be ready for it.
Yeah, well, that's so funny. Like, again, back to the vibration. Like you didn't even know that it was right there the whole time.
I'd visited it. I'd walked between the homes, but it wasn't like there are differences than like whatever picture I created as a child. Like for some reason, there's one watering hole that we all go down to. And the funny thing is, there even is a version of that. Like one of the family members created a large pond that looks like a mini lake with like a dock. And like, this is so similar to my vision. Why couldn't I connect them?
Wow.
Very interesting. Yeah.
That's cool. You keep me posted with that. I'll be curious. And I probably do need to watch this Osho documentary though.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Especially if this is what you're gearing up for. It is one of the best documentaries I've ever seen in my life. It's so well done. It's like cinematic, really draws you in, but it's hard to decide whose side you want to be on because you can just see the clear, I don't know, you see all the sides, but it's very interesting. Highly recommend it.
I feel like that's the theme for our interview today, like seeing things from all these different perspectives and like weighing whether you're going to believe them or understanding that it never can be like full truth. I don't know. Yeah. What's your main, go ahead. Just wrap this interview up for me.
It's a lot of pressure.
It was a nice, what do they call it? A moral to this story.
I think just the main thing that keeps coming up for me in this interview and elsewhere is you can't heal separation through more separation. If your way of healing separation is by pointing the finger and saying, all of you people need to be doing this differently, like this side is crazy, like why can't you just see things this way? Like none of that is creating a vibration that's going to have a positive impact. Even if, like, check your intentions, like what is this for? Like what is the energy that you're carrying? So regardless of what the words are that are coming out of your mouth, what you think your verbal message is, you also have an energetic message. So check the energy that you're carrying. And sometimes that's going to change even the words that come out of your mouth, the way that you present the information, the way that you perceive the information. It affects everything. And so your vibration, your energy matters the most. That's the first thing. When people say change starts from within, that's how I interpreted it, is as I first need to heal those things in myself. And sometimes the things that I see most brightly, the things that are most prominent in my reality are being reflected to me because that's what I need to work on internally. So coming back to yourself in every change and every message and every intention, I think is the first start.
It's well put, and sometimes frustratingly annoying when someone's reflecting you something that you don't want to work on at the time, but yes.
But when what is it? When the student is ready, the teacher will appear. I think that is so true. When I'm being faced with something and I feel resistance, I also have a knowing that now I'm ready. And so you can look at it as like, oh, this has been a problem forever, and like beat yourself up for the other times that you made this mistake, or keep resisting it and stay where you are. But I'm seeing this for a reason. It's just like when you read a book and you get all these messages from it and you go back and read it again, and it's like a whole new book. Like you hear things differently. It's because you've changed the first time. Even if you read it back to back, you're now a different person. And so you're going to get a different message. And so at the very least, even when I'm not, I don't think my ego self, my human, doesn't think that I'm ready to work on it. The universe knows that I'm ready. And that's the only reason that I'm even seeing that as a lesson.
I like that. Yeah. You're good at reframing things. You're good at like the mental jujitsu in there to.
Yeah, that's all I do with my whole life. I just go through a rolodex of perspectives and then land on the one that feels the most empowering. Because what other truth is there? Like, oh, is this even real? Like, if I look at it this way, I'm like, well, how do you feel about it? How is it changing you? Are you able to show up as a better version of you because of this perspective? Then that's all that needs to happen.
Yeah, the rolodex of perspective. I like that. Do you want to point people in any particular direction today? Where can they go to find more about you?
Yeah, I have a podcast called Mind Love, 2 words. You can search it on any of your favorite podcast players. You can also go to mindlove.com or find me on social at mindlovemelissa. I also have a daily email just called the Morning Mind Love. It's every weekday morning. You get a little way to shift your perspective towards something that's going to serve your highest good. And that's absolutely free. You can sign up on the homepage of mindlove.com, or if you're out and about, just text the word morning to 33777.
Ooh, classy. You got a texting thing going there. All right.
Reduce the friction.
Yeah. Melissa, great to catch up again. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me. I always love our conversations.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for listening to the whole episode. You made it all the way to the end. Congratulations. And I'm going to remind you again to join us for the no-cost Quantum Entrepreneurship Training, April 19th, 20th, and 21st. Again, this is a training that I put together, a high-level business training for coaches, healers, and spiritual entrepreneurs. You can sign up at derekloudermilk.com or find them in the show notes. And it's a free training. We're doing it live in person, so you're going to want to be there on each of the days. You'll have a chance to ask personal questions, maybe even get some coaching on your specific business. This is something that I would probably normally charge $1,000 for or more to attend the event, but I'm doing it for free as a service to my audience, to my listeners, and to help spiritual entrepreneurs. So save the dates, mark your calendars, and hope to see you there.